Hello and welcome. I'm Bear with Preparedness.com. We're going to do the brief today. If you're new here, subscribe, ring the little bell icon. That way you can stay tuned to all the world shenanigans that will inform your ability to be prepared for whatever lies ahead. If you're not new here, you know what to do. Share the show with people that you love, okay? Okay, Bear. Bear, can we see the sheep? Yes, briefly, but then we're going to do the brief, okay? Ta-da! Meat. Delicious meat. Alright. Bear Independent Brief, 12 October 22. Adding to the heat of the war, it appears that Belarus will now be joining Russia in the fight against Ukraine. Russia has armed Belarus with dozens of Iranian drones, and more plan to arrive in the coming days. The president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, has announced the formation of a, quote, joint regional group of troops, end quote, approximately 500,000 troops, and Russia's mobilization of 300,000 military-aged males that is now rumored to be closer to 1 million. In other words, big push by Putin et al. In Ukraine. Speculation on when that's going to be. Are they going to push the timeline and do it now before winter gets here, or are they going to wait till spring? The issue with spring being it gets very cold there, and because it gets very cold there, that's a good thing for Russia during the winter because they can move their trucks and their tanks cross country. However, in the spring, when all the snow thaws, everything turns to mud, they can't move cross country, which means they get channelized onto roadways, which makes it easier to ambush them, because an ambush is an attack on a moving or temporarily halted element, right? So if you're bogged down in the mud, it makes it easier to attack you. If you're channelized on the roadways, that makes it easier to attack you. And so speculation about when this big push with 500,000-ish Belarusian troops and 1 million-ish Russian troops will take place in Ukraine, if at all. Remember, Belarus was a jumping off point at the beginning of the war in February 22 into Russia. So Russia is claiming that Ukraine has been planning attacks against Belarus and that they need to head off any possible aggression from Ukraine or NATO. According to the Washington Examiner, Russian troops are, quote, pouring into Belarus by the trainload, end quote. Unsurprisingly, Ukrainian President Zelensky has called for an international monitoring on the country's borders with Belarus, saying that the troop mobilization there poses a threat to supply lines. This Wednesday, aka today, the United Nations General Assembly will vote on a resolution condemning Russian annexation in eastern Ukraine. This being the recent votes that took place in the Luhansk and Donetsk and Crimea regions, breakaway republics in Ukraine, which voted some 60+% majority to join Russia proper. The issue here being that Russia has stated that any attack on Russian territories or Russian citizens by NATO would create an instant escalation in the war. So if part of Ukraine de facto overnight becomes part of Russia, that means any combat operations that are taking place in those parts of what was Ukraine and now, because a piece of paper was signed, is part of Russia, would be seen as escalation. We've been talking a lot about a Black Swan event for the last half a year. The possibility where NATO members, NATO allies who are supplying materiel, right? Truck drivers that are driving stuff into the region, they're supporting the Ukrainian war effort. That makes them a legitimate target for the Russians. Well, what happens when the Russians blow up one of those supply trains full of NATO personnel? Escalation. So that's been interesting. So the UN General Assembly is meeting today to condemn Russian annexation in eastern Ukraine. The resolution is reported to have 70 co-sponsors, and according to Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield, the vote was geared towards, quote, defending the UN, end quote. Additionally, next week is the annual NATO exercise that focuses on, drumroll please, nuclear deterrence. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said the routine exercise, quote, Now is the right time to be firm and clear that NATO is there to protect and defend all allies. End quote. Also, recently, G7 leaders condemned Russia's most recent missile attacks on Ukrainian citizens and non-military targets. Because the attacks involved more than 24 missiles being fired from Belarus, Lukashenko is now under the condemning eye of the G7 as well. The day after President Biden, condemned Russia's actions and made more supportive statements of Ukraine, the Russian ambassador to the U.S. said, quote, "Such assistance, as well as providing Kiev with intelligence, instructors, and combat guidelines, leads to further escalation and increased risk of a clash between Russia and NATO." End quote. Which we all know. Stand by, gotta move the hose. Hose officially moved. In related news, this last Monday, more than 12 major national airports reported having to go offline because of denial of service attack. Los Angeles Airport reported that fortunately, quote, "No internal airport systems were compromised and there were no operational disruptions," end quote. Now, that's the official talking points. If their internal systems were compromised, they're not going to say, "Oh yeah, and by the way, they compromised all of our systems." So who knows? I don't know. LAX reported, we just talked about that. The pro-Russian hacker group Killnet is suspected to be behind the attacks. The group has been targeting allies of Ukraine since the invasion began, and is the same group that took down U.S. government websites in several states and a U.S. Congress website. So, now, all of these things, and if you're on Patreon, you have the written report, and if you're not on Patreon, you don't. All of these things should hopefully, while the information makes you want to focus on the micro, they're data points in the micro. You should have a long-term, sustainable outlook for how do I survive and thrive in the end of the world as we know it, right? What moves do I need to be making? Whether that move is buying more food or working on your water storage or getting some training or strategic relocation, whatever it might be, right? And so don't get all hyped up. Don't get all caught up in the moment. Saw a poll, something like 52% of Americans never think past more than 3 weeks ahead of time. 30% of people look as far forward as 5 years out. 20% of people, roughly, have a 10 to 20 year plan for their life. I would encourage you to fall into the 10 to 20 year plan bracket of individuals, because preparedness is maintaining normalcy for the people that we love. Implicit task, establish normalcy. And so I don't know what the future holds. I'm not a prophet. I don't have a magic crystal ball. And if I did, you should hit me in the head with a rock. Not allowable. So I don't know precisely what's coming ahead, but I do know that resilience is the cornerstone of resistance. And I do know that many of the things that we see happening today have befallen us before. Ecclesiastes, there's nothing new under the sun. For everything there is a season, right? And so here we are in this season of war and famine and plague again. It has happened before. It will happen again after this. Yet humanity has endured. The Roman Empire fell. There are still Romans, right? What happens to the United States? I don't know. But there will still be Americans, regardless of what happens to the American Empire. And let's be honest. I was talking with a brother a couple days ago, and he said, yeah, you know, the US dollar, is as terrible as it is still the best looking horse in the glue factory. I would agree with that. You know, there was a lot of talk for the last several years, sometimes at this channel, about the rise of China. China's not looking so hot right now. China is not, does not have parity with the United States of America. they're collapsing. Their ability to project military force is questionable at best. Taiwan is 100 miles from mainland China, and yet they've not taken Taiwan yet. So I don't think we'll see Chinese paratroopers in the United States of America. The Russians, they're having their own economic issues. Their ability to project force as displayed in Ukraine is not that great. Not nearly as good as many people, myself included, thought it was going to be. Doesn't mean it's not nothing, but they did not steamroll the Ukrainians in a week like a lot of people thought was going to happen, right? Europe, broke, no money, very small militaries, small navies, right? The ability to ensure global trade by protecting international waterways is questionable at best and in many cases non-existent. South America, yeah, maybe one or two countries, maybe Brazil, but they got their own issues. And so what does that leave? The Estados Unidos, United States of America. Now, I think that we are likely going to have a period of time, half a decade to a decade, of economic depression and hardship here in the United States of America. Cool. So what's your mid-range plan to weather that? And then what's your long-range plan to capitalize on the opportunities that that's going to present? How do you maintain normalcy for the people that you love? Not by buying a bunch of prepper gear and never using it, but by living a lifestyle that's as resilient and self-supporting as possible, right? Self-reliant. Because as the system hiccups and falters, if you are intimately enmeshed with the system gets a cold, you're going to catch the flu. So I would encourage you to be as independent of the system as possible. Build your own resilience, right? And have a long-term plan that as we look at these micro data points, Russia and Ukraine and China and Taiwan and Brazil and the US dollar, all these things, right? They're data points, micro data points that inform the macro courses of action that we need to be taking. So that 20 years from now, we could talk about, hey, remember that time when COVID hit and then Russia invaded Ukraine? Yeah, those were crazy days, man. Thank God we had food in buckets and a robust garden and sheep to eat, right? So mindset there, just be wary that you, be careful that you don't fall into the trap of hyperventilating every time the next headline drops at Fox News. Okay, cool. Listen, lots of content this month and every month at Patreon. Not a lot of content this month on YouTube because we are celebrating the Festival of Tabernacles, the Feast of Sukkot, but there's a lot of content over at Patreon. So thank you to the patrons for supporting the show. There's a link in every video and live stream description to Patreon. It's $5 a month. It's the best $5 you can spend on the internet. There is an overwhelming amount of content there. Refuge Medical. There are people in the store today shipping orders, and so if you've been wondering, should I get a first aid kit made in America, guaranteed forever, on 4 continents with all branches of the U.S. Armed Forces electively, refugemedical.com. And if you're not a cool guy operator, you drive a minivan or a semi-truck or a forklift, or you're a carpenter or an electrician or a school bus driver or a principal, you still need a good first aid kit. So all that stuff can be found at refugemedical.com. Your promo code is BearNation for free shipping, and in today's day and age, that's not nothing. Saves you a good bit of money. Free shipping. BearNation is your promo code. So please be checking that out. Thank you for supporting our American small businesses and American manufacturing. We make our own stuff. We have 3 sew shops that work with us as subcontractors here in the United States to make all of our stuff. We make it here. And that's part of that long-term plan, right? Supporting American manufacturing, which we're growing to the best of our ability. We are pouring deeply into American manufacturing. Refuge Training. There's some dates left, just a few slots left in Waco and Dallas, Texas. So if you need to learn the fine art of how to not die, I would encourage you to go to refugetraining.com, find the class that's nearest to you, show up to class, and get taught. March algorithm, massive bleeding, airway, respiratory, circulation, head injury, hypothermia, everything else, CPR, AED, force-on-force scenario-based training. We do all of that at refugetraining.com, so check that out. You can use Bear Nation as the promo code there as well for a percentage off the cost of the class, and grindstoneministries.com. We are spinning up to deploy to Florida for Hurricane Ian. We actually have 2 crews on the ground right now in Florida doing stuff, and we will be doing a full-blown deployment the end of this month in Florida. So if you would like to join, you need to sign up for the email blast at grindstoneministries.com. That's where the op board will go out for the details on everything we're doing in Florida. Additionally, Caleb House, which you can donate to through grindstoneministries.com. If you think it's an abomination that there are men out there who are raping children every day of their miserable lives, and you think those people belong behind bars or in the dirt, so do we. If you think those kids need to be rescued and restored, so are we. We do that at Caleb House. So thank you to everybody who supports our operations there. We literally could not do it without you. Hi, you listening? Yeah, you. The best audience on the face of the earth, the Bear Nation. We have been blessed to be able to do many mighty things in service to the Most High because of your support. So thank you for that. I pray y'all have a blessed day. Shalom.